Welcome to the first afternoon of the very first Yeo Valley Organic Garden Festival. It seems really churlish after our summer of drought to even remotely moan. And Sheila, yeah, the risk of rain or the threat of rain, which is often what's heard, isn't it, on the weather forecast. And of course, we're delighted to see it. Thank you for coming, rain. So I'm not going to introduce you to these lovely people. They're going to introduce themselves. But I have a couple of people to thank. So Sarah and Tim Mead for having the thought of this and putting it together and bringing all of us together to learn and be inspired from each other. And also to Rocket Grow, who are the sponsors for this headline tent. So thanks to them. And they've got a large, actually, stand outside. So I'm going to hand you over because Nigel Cox and Sheila Das are going to talk about the next generation of gardeners and how we go about that. And there will be questions at the end. And in half an hour's time, I'm going to stand here looking expectant. And that means it's your turn to ask questions. So line them up. And actually, there are free seeds that get given across for really good questions. Yeah, bear that in mind. Okay, many thanks.
Thank you, Kath. Well, welcome back to those who are here this morning. Welcome for the first time for those who've come in from the rain. I hope you haven't come in just because it was raining. We are going to be talking about growing the next generation of gardeners, and I guess both of us have quite a lot to say about that topic. And this is going to be a conversation between Sheila and I. We've had conversations before, and sometimes they go on for quite a long time. But we are limited to the clock, so we're limited to half an hour. So just a little bit about us both. First of all, Sheila, in my mind, she's one of the most inspiring voices in UK horticulture today. She started her career in all sorts of things like records, drops and things like that. But she followed her passion for nature and retrained in horticulture. And that journey took her to the RHS gardens at Wisley, where she became a very important figure as the garden manager at Wisley. At Christmas last year, she moved on and became head of gardens and parks at the National Trust. And I know from looking at her Instagram posts that how many have you done so far?
I think I've been to 57.
57, and how many are there altogether?
About 280.
Oh, we've got a way to go. But yeah. If you follow on Instagram, you'll see all these wonderful places she visits. It sounds like a paradise job for me. Anyway, so she's known for her enthusiasm for sustainable gardening. So there is a bit of a link for those of you who heard Arit's fascinating discussion this morning with ideas of sustainability. And she has a real talent for training, and has an ability to encourage people from all walks of life to connect with plants and natural world. So that's Sheila. What about me? Well, one of my main roles is I'm the National Lead Assessor for apprenticeships in horticulture across, well, I said national, through England. I travel all over England seeing young people and older people, career changers, starting and embarking on their career in horticulture. And in fact, I know that there's a young lad here at Yeo Valley Organic Gardens who's embarking on that career as well. So let's start, Sheila, with the broad question is, why is it so important right now to inspire and train the next generation of gardeners?
Well, I think the quick answer is we don't have enough gardeners already. It's not something that has been kind of traditionally, conventionally promoted in schools, so it's never been really seen as a serious career, I think. But it's more important than ever now, and I think anyone who was in the room earlier, and you will hear John talking about this, John Little talking about this a lot, that, for me, there are no gardens without gardeners. So they're fundamental, really, to keeping our green spaces alive and creating an environment that we all want to live in for the future.
Yeah. From my personal experience, I became a passionate gardener because of my dad. And in a way, some of that rubs off from family to the next generation, and maybe we've lost a bit of that.
Yeah, I think we've definitely got a lost generation of gardeners. I think it's starting again, though. I see a lot of young people who are really enthusiastic, along with their parents, actually. But I would agree, I think there was a time, certainly, where it just kind of fell off the radar. Well, as we got more removed from the natural world, people stopped getting engaged with their gardens, and other things took off. So the technology comes, everything's more immediate. And I think we'll touch on this as we have this conversation, but that notion of time and slowing down, you need that in gardening.
That was great this morning, wasn't it?
Yeah.
That idea of time slowing down. Because we have this impression created maybe by television and all the other kind of things that gardening is an instant thing. And it's easy, everybody does it. Narrett said this morning, you buy that plant at the garden centre and take it home, and within half a day it's dead.
Yeah, I think the whole kind of culture of Instagramming and all that kind of stuff still kind of perpetuates a slight myth that you can suddenly magic up these sort of perfect results in your garden without very much effort. But actually training people, and this isn't always about becoming a professional gardener, having more opportunity to sort of thinking about the next generation of gardeners. That's not just about the profession, it's about how we live in our daily lives and how we all become gardeners.
Yeah, and I just wonder whether it's about the curriculum, in terms of the curriculum for young children. There's not a great emphasis on gardening, is there?
I think, actually, the young children isn't a problem.
It's when they get to
the
year 10 or something
years,
like that.
and then it kind of breaks off.
Yeah.
But somehow we've kind of disconnected from the fact that actually gardening is the best medium for teaching the majority of the curriculum anyway. It's got everything. I mean, to be a gardener, I know that's a very bold statement, isn't it? But it is. I don't know if there are any teachers in the room, but gardening encompasses. Somebody actually was talking to me the other day about what is a gardener? And when you actually sit down and start writing that list of the skills that you have as a gardener that go from everything from covering the 3 core science subjects. So if we think about all of that is required in gardening, and we often forget biology a lot, so that's exciting to see that coming up.
Yeah.
But then let's just tap into, so if you're a garden designer, there's the art side of it. So I was looking for something creative when I changed career. Yeah. You've got to be an artist, a historian, a philosopher, a scientist. I mean, we share that because we're both career changers, aren't we? And so, I mean, in terms of looking at, obviously we want to encourage children to develop an understanding of the importance of it, but also we mustn't lose focus of the fact that there are those career changers who are looking to get outside, who've been stuck in an office, something like that. I expect there are 1 or 2 looking around here. So that's that new wave of gardeners. If we call it a new wave of gardeners, so to sum up, where they're coming from? They're coming from primarily, where do you think? Where are we going to focus most? I think it's a danger to focus on any one area, because as you've referred to, the career changers are doing it, but equally we know we need to ramp it up in schools, and it needs to be a legitimate option for young people. There's a really sticky subject on that for becoming a professional gardener, because it's not a well-paid job, as many craft jobs aren't, actually, and it is becoming less sustainable as a career because of just the practicalities of living. And actually it doesn't reflect that massive amount of training and skill that's required, and I think that's been underestimated over the years. I'm on a mission, and anyone in the room who knows me will know this, is I want to ban the term garden maintenance. I hate the term maintenance, and as soon as you slap that term maintenance on, then it feels like, well, it's the odd job person. Actually it's not. You maintain your car, you maintain some, decor, but that kind of generative idea and gardeners have to have a lot of depth of skill to do that properly.
Absolutely. I mean, we were talking earlier, and the things you learn in college, if you're studying horticulture, you probably end up not using a lot later on, but you have to have those underpinning skills, don't you? Yeah,
I mean, there's a whole conversation to be had about the qualifications.
We could spend a lot of time on that, couldn't we? I think so. If we just think about the barriers, so the barriers are potentially financial. I mean, you're in charge of massive public gardens, and is there a challenge? Is the biggest challenge for you getting gardeners into public spaces as opposed to a gardener going off and doing their own thing privately?
Yeah, our big kind of public gardens and institutions are really struggling, actually, to support the numbers of gardeners needed to take care of places. It's just a simple fact because of the economic situation that we're in.
I mean, it's a lot of posh country houses and country gardens, they're in expensive areas of the country, so actually the cost of actually living is pretty challenging.
Yeah, really difficult. And I think sometimes organisations can go down the route of saying, well, we'll just have we'll afford it by having part-time roles, but then if you have a part-time role, you can't afford to live there and all that kind of stuff. So that is a barrier. There's no two ways about it.
I'm wearing my apprenticeship hat for a minute. I see that problem wherever I go. There are a lot of places I go where, for example, in the National Trust, an apprentice is trained up over 2 years and they develop all those skills and the culture, if you like, of a National Trust garden. And then at the end of it, there isn't the money to be able to keep them on. And so what happens then? You know, they've got that training and there's no follow through.
Yeah, ultimately, it comes down to how we start to prioritise managing our landscapes and our gardens. And again, referring to John Little, stopping this kind of big investment in the things that make gardens and just investing in the people who will create gardens over a longer period of time. So that is the challenge. I hate the term pipeline because it makes it sound like you're pushing people through a gas pipeline or something. But that kind of pipeline for gardeners, as you refer to, is really difficult. You have, like you say, some amazing training in amazing gardens, and then what? Then what happens? Helping all of our gardeners to kind of self-start, and I don't think sometimes for some of the gardeners who've trained in those spaces, gardening for themselves and running their own business is particularly appealing, partly because of the expectations of what people have about their domestic gardens or their garden landscapes, where maybe the type of gardening they're then asked to do in that, if I use that word, maintenance setting, is much more like outdoor cleaning than it is like gardening.
Leaf blowing.
So actually, I think the question is more fundamental. It's how do we think about gardening as a society? How do we all start to buy into enjoying watching our gardens grow more slowly, enjoying the natural processes, and therefore requiring the skills of somebody who really actually understands what those natural processes are?
Well, just broadening it out, because here we are in a wonderful organic garden, and there tends to be an emphasis in terms of training still, I'm looking at one or two other people in the audience, but still to advocate lots of chemicals and all those kind of things. So how can we make that pathway into a more organic approach to gardening?
Yeah, I'd love to see a radical reform, to be honest, of horticultural training. That's not to knock it. I've done my RHS certificate. I did it way back in the day, and I went to Kew and I did the diploma, and that's brilliant. And the structures and contexts of all of that more botanical training is really important. But I dream of the day of seeing a job advert for a gardener that doesn't say requires PA1, PA6 spraying certificates and a chainsaw licence, because they're not actually advertising for a gardener. No. They're advertising for somebody to kill stuff.
Yeah.
And most of the gardeners I've met, maybe some are exception, most gardeners are really interested in growing things. So imagine the future, and this is like the fantasy football league version of gardening job adverts, where your advert for a gardener says, must have field observation skills, must be able to be happy to start the job for the first year and observe what's going on before making any rash decisions. That kind of, can we start thinking more about growing and gardeners doing a generative growing job rather than maintaining, tidying, cutting back, keeping under control. There's a quote that I've shamelessly stolen from a chap called Gabe Brown, who's big in the regenerative agriculture world, and he talks about moving from this kind of command and control culture to observe and adapt. And, that idea of that if you want to change, small things, you change the way you do things, but if you want to change big things, you change the way you see things. And we have to start changing the way we see things and the way we train gardeners.
You kind of answered the next part of the question in terms of approaching redesign course. I mean, I know, and you probably know, that training in horticulture is a bit like a giant oil tanker. It's hard to turn it around, and it's difficult to get. I've seen courses which have advertised as sustainable courses, and as you say, you've got to have a spraying certificate and you've got to have a chainsaw certificate, which kind of makes a mockery of that idea of it being a sustainable process. And that links in with the sustainability that we talked about this morning. So if we've got one thing that you'd like to see, which is removing spraying courses. What else would you like to see in a redesigned course? I'll give you a couple of minutes for that one.
Well, actually, I think there's a really interesting thing that's happened in recent years with the way that the modern apprenticeship's been approached in horticulture. And there are lots of good things about that, I might say. But what I have noticed is that people don't know as much about plants anymore.
No.
And certainly I found that was the foundation of my horticultural training. I'm sure many people in the room who've studied it will say the same. You know, I learnt about plant families and taxonomy and how everything fitted together as part of the natural kingdom. And that really gave me some skills to start to unpick problems. So instead of just learning a list of plants, I was taught to recognise a plant family. So that means that and believe me, my plant knowledge now is rubbish, but what it does mean is that sometimes you can reach a situation cold and start working things out for yourself. And there's an analogy there with the rest of our training. I'd just love to see us having more of a systems approach so that we're thinking about the broader thing of how can we work out what's right in this scenario, how can I identify that plant based upon a whole set of factors rather than I'm recalling it from some plant ident that I did on a course.
And of course, the other side of that equation is the tutors and the trainers themselves. Many of those haven't been trained in those kind of sustainable processes.
Yeah.
So there's a question of training the trainers as well, isn't there?
Yeah, definitely. And so we're at this real kind of shifting point, really, I guess. And this is just about how we think about gardens as a whole. And it's difficult because people want advice, they want instruction, and we need that to some degree. You need just that guidance. But I think Arit mentioned this morning, sometimes you go to a talk and you'd just be writing down a list of plants and then you go home and none of them worked in your garden. So actually, we don't need those lists all the time. We don't need that sort of set of instructions. We just need to be coaching each other along. But it is really difficult because we're at a point of transition. So I think the other important point I would make about it is everybody needs to be kind to themselves and start going through this process. But the main thing is being curious.
Yeah, and that's that element which you and I talked about before is about observation.
Yeah.
And actually seeing things in action, isn't it? It's amazing how once you see something once, you'll see it time and time again. But if you don't observe, you might never see it in the first place.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
That sounds very profound, I'm sorry. but it's that observation, it's understanding, getting under the skin of what makes things grow. You know, I look at it and simply say, if a plant is unhealthy, what's wrong with it? Chances are it's in soil it doesn't like. You know, it's as simple as that. Because the soil provides everything that it needs to grow, and if you're not providing everything, then it dies. So that plant that you bought at the garden centre yesterday, and you suddenly find, as Eric said, is ericaceous, and you don't know the first thing about ericaceous, it's going to die, isn't it? I don't want to. That's a negative thing. But it is part and parcel of this. Is this understanding the basis about living things, isn't it?
Yeah, I remember, and it always makes my friend chuckle that I repeat this every time I speak publicly. I was at Kew and had a fellow student there who... I started at Kew and I felt like a complete imposter, basically. I joined this course with 13 other people who all seemed to already know quite a lot more than me. And this chap who was on my course had come to Kew taking a pause in his PhD in the taxonomy of cacti. As you can understand, I'd done 2 years in a hotel garden and the RHS General certificate, and then I rock up at Kew and I'm like, oh my God, I don't know anything. And I kept obsessing about this in my first few months. I happened to be on placement with this chap. And he just turned around to me, and I think he got a bit annoyed with me, constantly having all this self-doubt. And he said, Sheila, stop worrying about it. She said, it's not what you know, it's what you understand that matters. And that absolutely stayed with me. And actually, if I think back to Q, which was a brilliant experience, there are those things you pick out, aren't there, from your learning that actually stand you in good stead in a much broader sense, you know. So those little things that you hang on to are really important. Yeah. And that runs as a mantra for me in my head. Stop worrying about the fact that you don't know anything. And actually celebrate knowing that you don't know everything, because that's a real skill to know what you don't know. And I think we don't do enough of that in our training as well.
That's a nice takeaway thought. Know what you don't know.
The pressure is always there to learn, but actually celebrate the fact that you know there's more to learn and that you know you need to ask a question.
I guess everybody in this audience probably has been surprised and found out something in their garden that they didn't know, and you know, suddenly you've learned something new. We all learn in gardening, don't we? And of course, the climate change and all the other kind of things are changing in our gardens. I mean, at that moment, suitably, the rain comes pouring down. I'm going to link it back to organic practice a little, because this morning we were talking about, or Eric was talking about sustainable gardens and the aim of creating sustainable gardens. And in terms of using organic practices, as evidenced in this wonderful garden, how do you think that those contribute to, you know, good results in terms of growing?
Yeah, I think the first thing to say about things that we group together, so organic is a term that we've been familiar with for many years now, and I think that's the first thing to do, is to understand what that actually means. And for some people it's quite a rigid thing, and for other people it's a set of principles, really. And I think the principles that everybody can apply, because clearly not everybody in this room in their home garden is going to be organic in a certified and registered way, you know. And so for some people, organic means being, you know, having that certification. But actually, just understanding what is that organic principle. And I think there's always a danger when you say things are just an absence of something. So somebody might define it as an absence of using chemicals. But actually, I think certainly lots of the organic growers that I've met are much more about being more creative and generative, if I avoid the regenerative word, but, you know, being creative, generative, and working within a system that makes natural sense. So we can learn a lot from that by just thinking about more ecological ways of gardening. And I mean, it is a bit of a, you know, somebody was saying this morning that they'd had never had a problem with not using peat because they'd never used it. Same for me. And again, I've never really used chemicals. I did that spraying certificate. I don't know one nozzle from another on a blooming spray because I never used it. I just never did it. So actually, I think that you just get used to not doing those sorts of things, but actually not thinking about it as an absence of something. But being organic is much more about thinking about a more holistic system. For me, that's definitely...
And there's that word which crops up from time to time, greenwashing. How do we avoid greenwashing, whatever that means, in terms of organic methods? We need to be able to establish they make a difference. Do we need to do that, or it speaks for itself?
I think it goes back to much more of this: be informed as an individual. Yes. Okay. And instead of just thinking, I've got this as a label, what does that mean? Scratch beneath the surface of it and understand what is that person actually talking about. If they say they're organic or they're regenerative or they're any of these terms, you know, ask the question, and what does that mean? And make your own definition of that.
Because tomorrow we're going to be talking about jargon as well as part of this, because there's an awful lot of jargon in our business, and it kind of covers a lot of things up, and we need to demystify a bit, don't we?
Yeah.
It needs to keep it simple, I guess.
Yeah.
Now, keeping it simple, well, not simple. Let's go back to careers, because that's the main part of this topic of conversation. And actually, when we get to question and answer, it might be quite interesting to hear if there are people in this audience who are considering a career in horticulture or are halfway through or whatever. So please chip in at that point. But so we've got this challenge. We know we've got this challenge. So how can we make it feel a more attractive proposition, and how can we make it more rewarding to the next generation? And I'm conscious also of particular challenges, for example, in the nursery growing industry. Yeah?
Yeah, I think there's a heap of things to think about there. So I'm going to touch on that first, the nursery industry. We often don't talk about this when we talk about careers in gardening, and we have a dearth of people actually growing plants. And the last time I thought about it, there were two things that I felt I needed in a garden, and it was a gardener and some plants and some soil and water and everything else. But obviously, we're really, really struggling, I think, at the moment for nursery growers. People are retiring, people are stopping doing it. We fall prey a lot to the big commercial nurseries and plant production on a grand scale that aren't always producing the things maybe that we need. Mm-hmm. John referred this morning to bare root growing and growing in sand and all those things that take out all the inputs. And those skills are really, really important. How do we make that appealing for people? Again, this comes down to, it's not dissimilar to conversations we're having about good food and other things, is it? No. What are we prepared to pay for our plants? What are we prepared to pay for a nice garden, to have a gardener garden it? And how do we prioritise that? How do we accept, and it comes back to the time question, I can grow a garden more slowly and spend my money more slowly and build a better ecosystem as a result of it if I'm not just going out and buying a load of expensive plants from a big commercial nursery, in one hit. So all of that kind of ties in together. But to make the profession kind of more appealing, or actually just to make anyone want to garden, I think is much more about understanding just how valuable it is. Yeah. We talk about language. Another of my bugbears is ornamental gardening, which makes it sound like something you don't need. It's just a nice to have. It's actually more fundamental than that. And actually, the way we influence our spaces around the places that we live, we've touched on today talking about water movement and slowing the flow. We can all do that. When people think they don't have any agency over what's going on with climate change and the environment, we can actually do that through gardening. Yeah. And when I started gardening, I genuinely thought, and I still do believe, gardeners will save the earth, and if it needed saving. But I think that's really how we make it appealing, is valuing it. Because we can't just turn a money tap on and say we're going to pay gardeners twice as much in public gardens.
And let's go back to this thing about time and nurture. Because I think that's kind of an idea about this in terms of thinking about the way we can use leaders in gardens. And I mean, we've got lots of wonderful leaders in gardening here over the 3 days. But there's also communities where we need to help those communities to nurture those gardeners of the future, yeah? And keeping the new talent as well. It's terrible to think that an apprentice at the end of an apprenticeship can't get a position as a gardener when they're very skilled. They have to have a PA1 and PA6, I'm afraid, still. But then they go and work at Tesco's. It's such a waste of talent, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think we have to be talking about that very early on in our training, designing training programs and how we support people through that pathway and career network. So there's definitely more work to be done on that, I think.
Okay, I'm looking at that clock, and we've got 1 minute, Kath. So I haven't got much longer to. I've got one more question for Sheila. If each person here today took one step this week to help grow the next generation of gardeners, what would you like it to be?
I think just absorbing the type of information that is now being shared and having an awareness of what gardens can and will become. Broadening our perceptions of what good looks like, of what a nice garden looks like, and actually understanding a garden more as an experience. If we all collectively understand that, then we all start to want something different, but we can't grow that generation of gardeners, be it professional or be it ourselves, if we're not starting to kind of perceive our gardens in a slightly different way. And actually, it's not about thinking, oh, but I like my begonias in my peat-based compost. It's not about that. It's about thinking, we can have things. There are opportunities here. It's not about loss. It is very much about new opportunities and seeing new beauty.
I think that's a good point to end on. Thank you, Sheila. That's been fascinating, and hope you found that interesting.
Sam, can you put this one up? Okay, we are facilitating microphones There's men with microphones and seed packets in their pockets. So, yeah, if that's not an incentive, I don't know what is. Lady at the front, right here. Any minute now, I'll be right with you.
Hello? Oh, yes. You mentioned, and perhaps everybody does know what it is, but you said something about greenwash, and I don't know what that is.
Do you want to try that one?
Yeah, just so greenwashing.
It's just pretending something is green when it doesn't. It's just like, just covering up for the fact. It's a hard word to explain in a way. It's what we see all the time in terms of organisations running away with premises and telling us that things are something that they are when they're not, pretending that things are good for the environment. The problem is that we're all desperately seeking it, and I think this is what's really sad about it when it happens, is everybody wants to live well. Everybody wants to live in a positive way. I genuinely believe that of humanity. Unfortunately, marketing, big business, wants to pick us up and prey on that emotion. And that kind of greenwashing does happen in horticulture too. As much as we all think we're seeking the right ways, or what might be the right ways of doing things, we can get carried along with things that are actually a bit of a red herring. So red herring, people are very keen to
sort
of emphasise green credentials when they're not really there, I guess. So it's a marketing strategy which convinces people something which isn't actually true.
Thank you. Lady at the front, right here.
Thank you. When you talk about the next generation, how do you reach a child who lives in a city centre who maybe hasn't even seen a plant grow? Oh, sorry, that's a huge generalisation. But how do they even know that there's an opportunity that this could be a career, other than through education? How likely is it that it's ever going to be on the syllabus?
And I can give you direct examples of that. I know particular places, towns, where the children have never been out of the town. They've never seen a green field, and you take them out, and all of a sudden they realise there's a world out there which is different. And I think that's probably partly, it's down to the parents thinking about it and taking them out, perhaps. But it's always difficult because not everybody can do that, you see.
I think it's really limited for different communities in different places, and how and it actually isn't just children, it's other people too. I believe strongly that food is the gateway to pretty much everything. And I've seen really good examples where children and their families have engaged much more with natural process. And I don't think this is just about gardening. I think it's about a reconnection with nature. So at the National Trust, one of our big ambitions is to restore nature and people's connection with it. And it's the connection that's been broken. I was fortunate enough to travel to America last year and visited an amazing project in the middle of Arizona in Phoenix in this, it was a food desert in terms of kind of what was going on in that society. There was a 19-acre growing space, and they had community plots where children would come and harvest and create like veg boxes. And instead of just doing that as a community effort and then those veg boxes got sent out, they took them home. And they took them home to their parents, and then they had a conversation about where they'd seen that food coming from. And that really visceral feeling, that instinct that we all have of needing to eat, is a really powerful way of connecting us with the process of how food comes about. Mm. And so that, for me, is a really powerful connector. So it's why, and kids love it. If you go to younger children in schools and you've got a school garden, you can see the excitement that they get when they grow food. How do we maintain that and keep it going? And I think part of the problem is that, certainly here, we do everything in isolation. The powerful piece of that story was the kids took the food home to their families. I saw another example in New York Botanics where families were gardening together. And actually it's bringing people together so that it becomes part of something that they connect with their everyday life.
Don't you think in schools, for example, you get the younger children, they're very engaged in outdoor activities, and gardening is one of them, often depending on the teacher. And the problem often is you have a really enthusiastic teacher in the school, some of you may have come across this, and then they leave, and then the whole thing falls flat. But then you get to that age, well, it's probably year 10, where they have to make the decisions of which way they're going. And because of the perception, and I've heard teachers say, gardening's for numpties, and that's a pretty horrifying perception, and that's got to change so that kids, when they get to that age, can make a decision, yes, I really want to go into gardening. I mean, I'm a career changer, you're a career changer, and I expect there are quite a few career changers here who've ended up being involved in gardening as a second career when they suddenly realise they don't want to be stuck in an office for the rest of my life.
And probably need more guerrilla gardeners when you have people going out in roundabouts and things and just kind of making it cool.
But how we garden our public spaces is really fundamental.
Yeah.
If you see things around you, and that is shifting and changing, and there's really good work going on in cities like Sheffield and other places where we're starting to see that you can have vibrant planting in urban contexts.
Absolutely.
And we don't have to see our urban spaces as separate from our natural world. We are nature, we are part of it. We've built cities, that's part of what we do as humans, but we can, still integrate all of that nature into our cities. It is possible, and I believe it's happening, and I think there's good reason to be hopeful about that.
Let me go up to this end of the young lady there on the end. Can you see? Have we got somebody else? Aha, thank you. It's on its way. It'll keep talking.
Okay.
I'll catch up with you. Yeah.
Lovely, thank you. So you've spoken a lot about gardening from a career perspective, but I suppose what I'm wondering is how we can influence young people who perhaps don't want to pursue a career in gardening, but it's equally as important to do it as a hobby or to, take advantage of our back gardens and our public spaces as you've been talking about. And I'm just curious to know what your opinions are on that.
Yeah, I think that broadening it out to the importance of it and the value of it, not only in terms of what we all know environmentally, but the well-being aspect of it, which we talk about a lot, don't we? And, ironically, I think this is an important conversation to have for professional gardeners that, if you're a really, really stressed, busy gardener with limited resources, not always that good for your well-being, but actually, if you're not, in some respects, it's better just to do it as a hobby. And I think that is coming to the fore more, because I do think there's an appetite for younger people into those teenage years to really connect. That penny is dropping, definitely. And I see and meet really inspiring people at that age in life who either want to get into it as a career, or they're just like, wow, this is just really interesting. I want this in my life as much as I want my smartphone, or I want music, or I want, and gardening and music are very similar anyway in terms of the way they make us feel and
And it links with that time thing again, doesn't it? Because social media, television and things give the idea that everything about gardening can be done just with the click of a finger. Actually, that's not what gardening is about. And a lot of people will start thinking that that's the instant gardening is the thing, but actually that's not real gardening, is it? In a way, you've got to live with your garden. And in terms, we are a nation of gardeners. We're still a nation of gardeners. But I expect, some of you may have bought a new house and you go and think, oh, I have a nice border in my back garden. You find you've got about an inch of topsoil and about 10 tons of bricks in the back garden. It's not conducive to making that very easy, is it?
But it's only not conducive insofar as the conventional ways that we've been talking about gardening. If you get John Little in front of them, and he'll show them how you can make a beautiful garden out of whatever you've got. And I think it's that sudden realisation now that we can have really amazing things with whatever we've got. And instead of saying, here's the perfect ideal of what a garden should look like, turn that around you can have a brilliant garden with whatever you've got. Here are different ways of doing it. And encouraging people to succeed, I think, is the answer for keeping people engaged.
It's just an interesting, maybe get a show of hands. I mean, how many people here, when they see a garden makeover programme on television, learn anything from it and think, oh, that's great? We're not going to get many. Oh, we've got a few. We've got a few. But it gives the impression, doesn't it, that this... It's a difficult one, that really, but not a huge number. But
those programmes will change. Who's to say that, that we can start having a different narrative around that? It doesn't have to be, But sometimes, actually... And I think it's really important never to have these really polar conversations, isn't it? You know, some of those programmes that we see on the television are going in and they're doing something really powerful and positive for those people in that moment, and it's really easy to be judgmental. I mean, I do sometimes grumble. I blame a lot on the 80s, 90s upsurge of makeovers, but it does have that transience about it, and sometimes we do see awful things in those programmes where people are going and slacking in massive trees and doing whatever, but actually, you know, for those moments, the garden is being transformed and it's changing somebody's life in that moment. And I think that's really important.
It's giving other people ideas about how they could perhaps change theirs.
Yeah, but who's to say that the narrative could shift a little bit with those gardens and those, you know, that idea of the makeover would be, hey, let's go and see what we can make with just what's here, or with very, very minimal. You know, how much can we do on this teeny tiny budget? That's a challenge that all of us in public gardens are really good at. Well, how can we do, you know, demonetize it and see what we can use our own resources?
Right here.
I work in a community garden in a small rural town, and we have a young gardener in her 20s in a sort of career change, you know, sorting out her life. She really wants to go into gardening. She applied to Kew and Wisley, huge competition, and I was interested, you were one of 13, so could these big organisations increase their intake of students? Because there's a lot of people who enter and ask and don't get.
Yeah, I think to talk about places like Wisley and Kew, they're very particular programmes doing things in a certain way. There's lots of opportunities to learn gardening in other places and in other ways, and that are really valuable. I was about to say just as valuable, but that makes it sound like those things are somehow up here, and they're not. There is a certain type of gardening in a big formal institution, in a big formal garden. And actually, I've seen people learn really and become amazing gardeners through other situations. So I think we can do better as an industry in shifting the narrative on what's available. I do think that a progression in how we offer qualifications, how accessible they are, the ability for people to... I know I struggled when I changed career to just even find a volunteering opportunity to get experience. So I would actually prefer to see us, as those big organisations, be offering more experiential things, more internships, more flexible ways of people being able to train. What I would say also is kind of not in defence of those organisations, but they're already investing quite a lot of money as large charities in trying to do that training. I would love to put a call out to kind of more private sector people to get involved in supporting that funding as well, so we can increase the opportunities and all work together to create a much more kind of healthy environment and more available environment for training. So those two particular examples, tell her not to be disheartened. They are very competitive to get into, and there's plenty of other opportunities.
Let me just say one thing for the apprenticeships. A matter of interest, of all the apprenticeship programs in this country, the one that has the largest number is horticulture. So there is a lot of positivity there. But there are also organisations who have lots of funds available for students to help them finance their training as well. So there is a lot out there. And it is... If you're aiming for the Chelsea, Wisley or Kew, there is a very extensive competition for those places, but that's not the only place that these opportunities arise. So, you know, keep plugging on with that. That's it. We're bang on 3:00.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you very much. Can I invite you to thank this lot with me? Thank you.